You're listening to the Journey Podcast. Join us today as we uncover the deep-rooted connections between trauma and chronic pain. This episode contains adult subject matter, and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we explore the connection between trauma and chronic pain, highlighting how energy work can offer healing. We discuss the ways emotional and physical traumas intertwine, leading to persistent pain, and how energy healing addresses these issues at their core. This approach emphasizes a holistic healing journey, merging the mind, body, and spirit. Lyn Delmastro-Thomson is a certified hypnotherapist and mind-body medicine practitioner using the healing systems of Body Talk and Body Intuitive. She is also a speaker and author of the Amazon bestseller, You Are Not Your Diagnosis. Lyn holds a master's degree in somatic psychology and has completed additional specialized training in biofeedback, therapeutic yoga, and Reiki. After being misdiagnosed with leukemia at the age of 25, Lyn became passionate about sharing with the world her message that just because a doctor has said an illness is chronic or incurable doesn't mean that it has to be a life sentence, and that Western medicine isn't the only approach to healing. When we explore healing beyond just the physical body, true healing, rather than symptom management, can occur. Here is my interview with Lyn Delmastro-Thomson. Hi, Lyn. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because the trauma and chronic pain connection is such an important and profound topic for today's conversation. I feel like it is so important in today's world. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. And do you want to share a little bit about yourself to get started and maybe what you do and how you've come to do what you do today?
Yeah, so I'm a certified hypnotist and an energy healer, and I specialize in working with women with chronic illness, especially autoimmune, and helping them to heal trauma and dysregulation in their nervous system that kind of contributes to that illness. That's my passion. And my passion for working with chronic illness actually comes from my own journey, which happened about 20 years ago. And you probably hear a lot of people where it comes from their own story. And in my 20s, I actually went through a major health crisis. I was in graduate school pursuing something completely not related to a healing career or path. And I got really some very startling news when I was supposed to have elective surgery. And so I was supposed to have a breast reduction. It was, again, elective surgery. And my pre-op blood work came back with abnormal results. And my surgery got canceled. And after 2 weeks in 2 different hospitals and tons of specialists and tons of tests, they diagnosed me with chronic myelogenous leukemia at the time. And as you can imagine, hearing the word leukemia kind of is very, very terrifying, especially when you're 25 years old. And it basically kind of shook up my whole life. I thought that that was the correct diagnosis, and I proceeded with the medical treatment that was recommended. And I kind of had this feeling in my gut over 3 years that something wasn't right as I proceeded through this process. And I kept questioning it, and nobody would listen to me. Everybody kept saying, no, the medication's working. You're getting better. Your lab tests show you're getting better. But I would look in the mirror and I could see I wasn't getting better. And so that was really kind of started me down the path of looking outside of Western medicine and doctors because nobody would listen to me. And, intuition is something. It really tells you when something's not right.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I hear that a lot, that individuals aren't being listened to or their pains aren't being taken seriously. So I'm very sad to hear that and very sad to say that. I hear that a lot. So that's a really unfortunate part of the chronic illness and chronic pain journey, is that point where they run out of ideas and then there's no more.
Or they're so fixed in one idea, which was my experience.
Exactly.
It is this, instead of like, well, actually, like this doesn't really fit, what we would expect. She's not really looking well. She's not physically doing well. Who cares what a lab test says? It was a lab test that was showing something that was never there in the first place, So if you're basing all your evidence on something that was never there in the first place, we've got a real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you proceed from there? So you were in your mid-20s and getting that kind of news is, like you said, absolutely shocking. So after these conventional treatments, where did you turn? Where did your journey take you to find something that would actually help you?
So my journey started with actually kind of one of the things we'll talk about more today is nervous system regulation. So I started out I was so stressed out that my day-to-day life, I was a basket case because my life had been turned upside down. And so I started out by going to someone who did biofeedback therapy. And that person hooked me up to, if you don't know what biofeedback is, they hooked me up to sensors that, measured my heart rate, my breathing. I could see it in real time on a computer screen and then learn kind of how to breathe and how to use different simple techniques to calm myself. And then it kind of became this process of, okay, now I've learned how to regulate my nervous system. I needed to start to address the trauma of what I had just been through. So I went actually more a traditional route of talk therapy, which helped at that time. And my therapist recommended a class that was called Yoga for Healing. And I must say, at first, I thought she was crazy because my only exposure to yoga before was having gone to a gym and seen people inside the gym, in the room doing yoga. And, I thought, how does she think I can do a headstand, or like turn into a pretzel? Because, at that point I was weak. I was exhausted, my body was not in good shape. And that was my conception of what, yoga was. And she said, go to this class. I promise you, it's not what you're picturing. I thought, okay, what do I have to lose? But, an hour of my time and whatever it was, $12 for the class. It was very different than what I pictured. I laid on the floor. We did a lot of breathing, very small movements, blankets and bolsters behind me. And again, it started to calm me down. And from that point, I became kind of like the yes person of like trying different things. People would say, have you ever tried Reiki? And I'd go, no, but do you know somebody who's really, a skilled practitioner? Have you ever gone for acupuncture? No, but do you have a good acupuncturist? So I tried many, many things in that process. And all of them, I would say, did contribute on some level to improving how I was feeling on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I like the fact that you were open to those things after your yoga experience, because the beginning of that journey can sometimes be quite scary. There are a lot of different modalities out there to kind of ascertain what works for you and what doesn't. Can be quite the experience. So
it can be, yeah. And, if somebody said something and I was like, that doesn't sound like something I'd like, I wouldn't necessarily do it. But most of the things people suggested, there was that like internal little like, oh, I'm curious. What would acupuncture be like? I didn't have a fear of needles like some people do. So it was like an easy, like, sure, I'll try it. I can go lay on a table and have somebody put little tiny needles in my body and take a nap on the table. Let's do it.
So did you find something that helped you in your journey of healing that you were looking for? Did something actually help you feel better and look better and have overall better health?
I would say kind of it was a cumulative thing. It wasn't just one. I would say, that learning all of the tools to calm myself down was really helpful. Learning how to start to process my experience and the trauma was helpful. Regulating my energy body through acupuncture and, other energetic healing systems that I started to encounter all helped. And then I did find out, I finally got a specialist. I still was kind of in that Western model at the same time. And 3 years later, I went to a different doctor and he was like, yeah, it's not what they said it was. It's not leukemia. So I also had that shift of realizing, okay, I was actually right all along. And, going off of a medication that I really wish I had gone off earlier because it was making me sicker. But, you're scared. You're told this is leukemia. And you think if I don't do what's recommended, maybe I'll die.
Yeah. And you do kind of take the Western medicine as your first port of call, usually. I mean, you think they do labs, they draw blood, they do imaging, that they know what they're finding. And so you put your faith and trust in that as the first point of contact. So getting a second person to look at that was probably a really good idea and then gave you some more insight. So from that, did you look back at that whole experience at some point and start connecting the dots of how trauma affects you, how that connects in with chronic illness? Did you start seeing any patterns at that point when you were given the news that actually it wasn't what was wrong with you?
I think I realized I had trauma, not in the capital T sense of some people where, I'd never had abusive parents or anything like that. But, I'd been bullied as a child. I had some kind of unusual things that happened health-wise, like getting migraines that were so bad that would send me to the emergency room when I was a teenager. So, looking back at my history, I can see there were things that were traumatic that I think contributed. I actually would say going to the grad school program that I was in at the time, in a way, it was traumatic because I wasn't listening to myself. I was miserable for 3 years up until that kind of diagnosis point. And I kept saying, but I don't know what I want to do with my life. And it was too scary to just say, I'm going to go get a job, in an office and just have something to pay my bills while I figure it out. I needed, at that point, I needed a path. I needed to know where I was going. And, the me of now is like, oh, if I could only tell that, 20-something-year-old me, it's okay not to know where you want to go. You're young, you're figuring it out.
And how did your journey continue? So I'm curious, you go to the second doctor, they tell you that's actually not what's wrong with you. So did they find anything that was helpful to you, or were you just left to your own devices after that visit?
I think they did find, knowing what the correct issue was, it was a different blood issue. And so, first of all, going off of a medication that I didn't tolerate well, that had all of the wonderful side effects of chemo, but in a pill where you're nauseous all the time, it wasn't doing me any good because I didn't even need it. And starting to get a treatment where they would actually take blood, and just kind of like donating blood, but it doesn't go to anyone, is basically kind of the process for that condition. Once they started to do that, it also supported my body. I did find some benefit in that. And I think it really helped me, compounded with all that I was doing kind of in that 3-year period and continued to do afterwards to really recover my health.
And what kind of role did your mindset play in all of this? I could imagine that getting the first diagnosis could really send you into a tailspin of emotions and maybe even mental challenges that you're experiencing. So how did that all play out from sort of a mental, emotional standpoint? And you did some of the nervous system regulation. Did you continue to do that to support yourself through that? Or how did you experience all of that?
Yeah, I would say, it definitely affected my mindset. I mean, I went into a pretty dark place after hearing that diagnosis. I tried to, I called it, finding the new normal of living with the diagnosis of leukemia. But, that's a heavy label to have placed on you. And so trying to figure out my way, through that. And then actually the year after I was diagnosed, I had another traumatic experience in my life when my best friend passed away very suddenly. And so, and she was 18 days older than I was. So it was this very real moment of people, we were 26 at the time, both of us. It's like people at their mid-20s can just die. oh my goodness, this could happen to me too, and I had been pretty scared the year before when I went through all of that. I had had a blood clot that had blocked off my liver. Like, that's pretty terrifying. And I had to kind of dig my way out of it, and all that I was offered from kind of the doctor's perspective to address that was, oh, here's a support group for cancer patients. And I think I remember when I heard that, when it was suggested, I actually had like a complete freak out in my body because I don't think I knew the word empath at that point, but I kind of had the concept of what an empath was, and I knew that was me. And the idea of going in and sitting in this room, and hearing people talk about going through chemotherapy and all of this, I was like, no, that is not going to help me. That is going to make me worse. And for some people that may work. I don't want to say that has no value for anyone. Some people need to talk about it. For me, I said, no, like, please, I don't want to do that kind of thing that will just send me even further into the dark place.
Yeah, I think especially if you're very susceptible to absorbing and sensing other people's energies, I think that could even hinder your healing process if you're getting too much of the negative energy coming at you when you go there, say, frequently, because these support groups probably meet like once a week or something. So
exactly. Yeah.
That could be a barrier.
I would even avoid, when I'd be in kind of the treatment room where everybody gets chemo, where I wasn't actually receiving chemo like most of the people. I didn't want to actually even talk to people. I'd put on my headphones and kind of put that energy field around me, like, just leave me alone. Like, don't, only the nurse kind of could interact with me, just because, not because I had anything against those people. I actually had tremendous compassion for what they were going through, but it was just too much. And I knew it was too much to sit and have a conversation with people and hear, their journey and their story.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you're making, because it kind of brings us a little bit to how energy and frequency is involved in all of this, because those also play a part in our illness, disease, and our healing when we start changing the frequency. So did you have any experiences, probably later on, did you kind of find how energy and frequency ties into all of this and ties into trauma, ties into chronic illness? What did you find around that?
Yeah, I think it definitely kind of came later as I dove more into the world of energy healing, energy medicine, even more recently, just kind of finding a tool that works with energetic frequencies in a different way. And just realizing, how trauma basically creates like breaks, so to speak, in our energy circuits, like, I like the analogy of a fuse box, right? Like, it's like blown fuses in your fuse box. What's happening with like your acupuncture meridian systems or your chakras, or, there's other systems of understanding energy in the body. And when we have trauma, it's kind of like those things, the fuses get blown. And if we don't have the right supports, like, going to somebody who can work in that way, then, does a fuse ever reset itself in a fuse box? No, usually we need some sort of assistance to make that happen.
That's a really great analogy, actually. And I do think that energy and frequency is involved in really everything. It's involved in how we become ill and how we can affect healing. So that's a really important part of the puzzle, I think. And what did you find? I'm curious. You said you found a way or a technique that involves energy. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? I'm very curious now.
Yeah. So last year I found a tool called the AO scan, and it's kind of an advanced biofeedback technology that also works with frequencies, and it can measure, what's out of balance in the body. And then you can also send yourself, or I use it with clients as well, sending people frequencies to help rebalance things. And I started using it last year. A friend had offered me the opportunity to just try it. And I was dealing with some depression last year because my mother is kind of in kidney failure. And that was a lot to take in. It was not an expected piece of news. And I was dealing with some depression. And in 3 days, I found that using this particular system on myself, it was like if you thought of depression as kind of like a heavy blanket put over top of you, like the blanket just went away. And I was like, oh, I feel like myself again. I don't feel like crying all the time or just low energy, sad. And I was doing all of the things I knew how to do to help the depression shift. And it still was kind of pesky and didn't want to leave.
That sounds like a really fascinating thing. And can you do this remotely, or do people have to be physically with you, or this something you can scan them from afar as well, or how does that work?
Yes, yeah. I don't have any in-person clients. So other than me being near the device and using it on myself, all of the people that I work on use it at a distance. And it actually has the power to work with people in groups as well. So you can kind of send frequencies as a common theme, like if you want to help people who are feeling really stressed out. I did a group in December around holiday stress, and it was fascinating. I didn't know what to expect because I was new to using this with people. And every day, in this group that I was running, people would say, I feel so much calmer, or that thing that triggered me didn't seem to trigger me today. And it was like, wow, how amazing is it to have, these tools that we can help people all around the world or ourselves with.
Yeah, I guess energy, it really has no barriers. It doesn't know any borders. So
Exactly.
It just goes where it's needed. So yeah, that's wonderful. I like the idea of that, of even doing group frequency sessions. How cool is that? So if you're working with anxiety
amazing,
or something, yeah.
Yeah. And people even working with releasing stuck emotions and traumas, I'm finding people notice that, like just a lightness happening in their energy fields and in their minds. And it's very neat.
And do you use this with people who are struggling with chronic pain or chronic illness as well? Can they find some relief from maybe anxiety around their diagnosis or things like that as well?
Definitely. Yeah. It can help with the emotional aspect. It even has frequencies to help with pain relief frequencies, which I've used a few times on myself if I've had like a headache or something like that, or I've used it on, clients who are having some acute pain from something. So it's amazing. It's like this huge database of all of these different things that it can help with.
Wow, that sounds really fantastic. And you also mentioned before when you talked about your journey that you work with hypnosis. So how does hypnosis and the subconscious mind tie into all of this? So we have the energies, we have the frequencies. How does that piece tie into how you work with your clients or on yourself even?
Yes, yes. So the subconscious mind, first of all, is kind of like the storehouse of all our experiences. It remembers a lot more than, we might even consciously remember. There's things that part of your mind will remember about your past that I could ask you and you might say, I don't remember that. And what happens when we have trauma, especially is it gets stored in that part of the brain and it gets locked in. And then it creates all sorts of beliefs too about how the world operates. So we have beliefs, I'm not safe. The world isn't safe. It's not safe to be healthy, maybe. Like it's very interesting, the beliefs that can get formed over time. And so what I use hypnosis for is to kind of help all of those things that are there that are not benefiting us in the subconscious. We can't work with the subconscious from the conscious perspective. Unfortunately, it's like, you just can't change what's written in that record by talking about it. And so we have to actually go in, and hypnosis is, to me, one of the most effective and efficient ways to go in and look at, okay, so you believe you're not safe in the world because of things that happened in your past. Understandably, like it's not to say that doesn't make any sense usually for people, but do you want to keep believing that? And how can we reprogram the mind to believe, no, I'm safe. There's safety for me in the world.
And does that have repercussions for chronic pain, chronic illness, and the trauma that people have experienced? What kind of changes do you see when you work with people with hypnosis?
Usually it's pretty efficient in terms of how change will happen. So I'm thinking of a client I had last year who had been working with a therapist on trauma in her past that was also affecting, her health. And she decided she wanted to try to add hypnosis into what she was already doing. And she said, wow, like I'm getting all of these changes so much faster. I talked about these things for years to my therapist. But unfortunately, again, we're working at that conscious level when we're talking about, I remember what happened, and this is the story of what happened, but the subconscious might remember it a little differently too, because it records, like, I can't remember how many bits of data, but it's like an incredible amount how much that part of our brain can record in each and every moment that, our conscious mind would short circuit if we tried to remember all of that. So to see, people be able to do that, and, sometimes I find it more effective than talking about it, because talking about it can be re-traumatizing as well for a lot of people. I actually, going back to what was going on with me last year, and I was struggling with the depression, and I thought, well, I'm not really a believer anymore in talk therapy, but I'm really struggling. So maybe I'll try it. I went to 2 appointments, and I felt just so much more stirred up after each appointment, and nothing was cleared from me. And I went, nope, I have to go back to the energy piece. Like, it's just not working for me. And so it's nice to be able to address trauma without always having to go into talking about it for people.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that can really prolong the healing journey if that keeps coming up and you keep having to relive that. So that sounds really great. And so if you're doing these scans, then people don't have to relive their trauma. You can adjust the frequencies, or how does that work?
Yeah, I can use frequencies, or you can, use different hypnosis audios that I can create for people to help, reprogram the mind around you're safe. There are certain styles of hypnosis that will sometimes take a person back into kind of the memories, but usually it's done in a way where there's more removal from it. So you kind of don't imagine yourself in the scene. You're kind of like floating above the scene, watching it like a movie, instead of like, oh, it's happening to me again right now.
Yeah, that sounds actually a lot more comfortable and also a lot quicker. So I'm not surprised that your client told you that it was working very effectively, very quickly. I think when we get the buy-in from the subconscious mind for change, it can happen very quickly and very rapidly and stick around. And when we try and do that to the conscious mind, there tends to be a lot of resistance, because we're trying to go against where we feel safe, what we have known so far. So that makes a lot of sense. And so how do you combine all of these things then? What do you think is the most effective way to help your clients when they're experiencing trauma and they're working with chronic illness or chronic pain? How do you find what works for them, and how do you combine these approaches that you have?
Yeah, so I've kind of over the years developed my own methodology as a way of combining the things. So kind of one of the pieces is working with the subconscious. Not everyone is 100% open to hypnosis, and so sometimes that's kind of off the table for a few people. But if people are open to it, usually there's a hypnosis component to look at, what do you currently believe, your health, safety in the world, whatever it is that we need to focus on. And then what do you want to believe? How can we reprogram your mind to believe what it is that you really want? And then I work with kind of energy healing tools to really get in there, clear out stuck emotions from the body, just working with rebalancing all of the systems of the body. And hearing, the tool that I use too is also very much hearing the story that the body is trying to tell us through the symptoms, because symptoms really are messages. It's just most of the time people are like, I have no idea what this is telling me. Help. Can you translate? So that's part of what I help people also understand, is like what it ties to. And then I work at the energetic level too, with the frequencies, and the energy healing is frequency work as well.
So I'm thinking that we've probably piqued our listeners' curiosity at this point. A lot of energy and hypnosis. So what kind of programs and services do you then offer in working with clients? So if listeners want to know how they can connect with you or how they can work with you, let them know. What can we do?
Yeah. So this year, I'm excited that I've opened up a membership because I was getting to the point I didn't have any more one-on-one space. So I do occasionally have spaces for one-on-one. If you're not a group person, you can always reach out and find out if there's availability. But I'd love to share a little bit about my membership, which is really a trauma healing membership that focuses on all of these areas. So it focuses on the mind and the subconscious. It focuses on the emotional body and the nervous system and the energetic body using the frequencies on a regular basis too. So it's neat. People get frequency support each week, several times a week. And, you don't have to do anything as part of that part of it. It just kind of happens for you. I'm sending the frequencies. People are like, oh yeah, I feel really good this morning. You must be sending frequencies.
Yeah, that sounds like a great membership. And of course, we will be linking to all of Lyn's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can connect with her on, I'm guessing, website, socials, and then find out more about your membership. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check in the show notes for all of that information. And this has been another incredible episode. And I really hope that our listeners have enjoyed our journey into the trauma and chronic pain connection, because this has been such a wonderful conversation. And again, I've learned so much in this time that we've spent together. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. I really, really appreciate it, Lyn. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And definitely something we need to talk about more is how we can work on advocating for our health and supporting ourselves through these different approaches. So thank you for sharing what you have experienced and helping listeners finding their way of healing and finding well-being. Thanks, Lyn. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejourney.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.